Welcome everybody to our bi-weekly webinar. Excited to have you all. This is a good one. You know, my co-host Jim's going to be hosting how to write powerful addendums, and who better to give that advice than a real estate attorney? Jim, how many years you've been a real estate attorney now?
I've been doing real estate transactions for 40 years. I've
40.
been in private practice for 20.
Yeah, that's amazing. So we're going to get some great expertise. You know, as just little people that don't know or they're watching at home on a recording, I'm an active agent, just like you all. Been doing this over 25 years. And I'm also the founder of RealTrade, online marketplace, social media platform for real estate. So check that out, realtrade.io if you haven't. We're doing some exciting new developments too that I will be releasing soon. So, but I think there's nothing more valuable that you can add to your customers than writing powerful addendums. I think it's the one thing that you can do as an agent to protect your clients, right? Make sure that they're concise, they get to the point, no wasted energy, and it's going to be awesome to have Jim shepherd us through this, Jim. On
Yeah, there's two parts to this. There's controlling the conversation, and there's writing the addendum. That's the icing on the cake. Before we get into it, I want to mention a couple things. Crossing for cystic fibrosis is coming up. You guys know we're heavily involved in crossing for CF. I'm going to be hitting you up soon for that. We have our reoccurring social event, third Thursday of the month. Title Advance, I just got some rave Title Advance reviews from Fed, and I have seen Title Advance save more deals recently than as equity gets skinnier than I care to count. Like and subscribe. I've reminded you guys enough about our closing cost calculator, the updates we made for the new buyers forms. If you guys have questions, put them in the chat. I apologize for the terrible lighting today. Put them in the chat. You can turn on your cameras. It gives me better input. I love the small group setting that can see you guys, your facial expressions and all that stuff. Also text me 24/7. I had agents text me this morning about a condo where they were, I'm not the closing agent, where they're at the last minute having condo restrictions on renting. And I love working through those questions with you guys because it gives me more stuff to talk about when we meet. Text me future topics. If you guys want to talk about stuff, anything you want to talk about for the future. And Ryan, if you did not have anything you wanted to add, without further ado, we'll jump into it.
Let's get the party started.
All right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep, crystal
All
clear.
right. So this is a topic that's agents know how important this topic is, and they feel when they're losing control. The secret to great real estate agent service is controlling the conversation, right? Not letting your client feel like they're running away or the other agent feel like they're running away with the topic. You want to control the conversation, and we're going to teach you how to do that. I'm going to give you guys what I call 3 years of law school in 30 minutes. Text me 24/7. I'm terrible at email. I'm sorry. I admit it. I just can't keep up. And then paragraph 20, always write the closing agent is, and you can write new path title, and then we can work together. Before we get into our main topic, I want to talk about an issue. If you guys aren't aware of it, Ryan, are you aware that FREC is in the crosshairs to be done away with?
Yeah, no, I know they sponsored a bill to get rid. I mean, there's a bill, right, to get rid of them.
Is
Right.
everybody aware of this? Yeah. So, I mean, this is, to me, this is just, it blows me away. But here's some basic facts. We've all dealt with bad agents, and we know what a time suck bad agents are. And we don't want to all become tattletales. But who will police 400,000 agents who don't do enough deals to do a good job? Who's going to police that? I'm not suggesting we all become tattletales, but I think we all agree there are too many agents in Florida. There are just under 500,000 agents in Florida. There are just under 500,000 sales in Florida. Roughly 10% of the agents do 90% of the sales. Just pause on that for a second. That means that there are 400, that there are around 40,000 agents. Let's see. There are 400,000 agents doing 40,000 sales or so a year. The most productive agents do 20,000 or so, 20 or so deals a year. So 400,000 agents are driving up 100,000 transactions. That's 4 or less a year. How good a job can they do? How in touch are they if they're working their waiting jobs and things like that? If FREC is not policing real estate agents, the responsibility falls on the DBPR, the Department of Business Practice and Regulation. These guys are already regulating this list of people. It gets better. Every single one of these professions is policed by DBPR. And DBPR has 1,500 people and 150 investigators. They almost have 150 categories of profession that they're supposed to be policing. How can this happen? It doesn't even make sense to me. And so I would implore you guys, get behind and oppose House Bill 1461. The single biggest argument I find is to reduce operational costs. How do we set a bar then for everybody to not become a real estate agent in Florida? If you read the danger report from 2017, the danger report said the biggest threat to real estate brokerage in the United States is the unsophisticated agent. With 150 investigators, how can those guys possibly do a good job? And if anybody has any comments or they can see any issues in favor of this disbanding FREC, let me know. But as far as I can tell, that little bar to entry, that fee nobody likes to pay, that keeps everybody, I won't say the riffraff, but that's a bar to entry. That's a club. And so if anybody has any thoughts to the contrary, I'd love to hear more as to why FREC should go away. But as far as I can see, FREC is our best friend. I've sat in on a couple of FREC investigations, and did I think that they necessarily weren't as well guided as they could have been? Sure, they were overly cumbersome and things like that. But this is a really important topic for us to lean into. And I think as far as everybody and their brother becoming an agent, FREC is a low hurdle to entry that needs to be maintained. Again, Ryan, if you had any thoughts to the
Well, no,
contrary.
I want to say, like, I just try to search AI to find out what is the budget for FREC, right? If that's the biggest thing. And it says it's not publicly disclosed as a single
No,
specific
FREC is all
number.
privately funded by agents.
Yeah.
So they
So,
want to lower the cost to entry to become an agent by doing away with the entry fee. I mean, it doesn't even make sense to me.
well,
Anyway,
it says here that the FREC is a government agency, right?
it's a quasi-governmental agency.
So
It's
it's
not.
part budget is part of the state budget, you know? So I don't
I,
know, like, what's the budget? I can't, they're not saying that that's public information. So,
I can't find anything that says state funds flow into FREC. FREC is just
yeah.
it's an association. I mean, it was a DeSantis, as far as I can tell, initiative as far as cost cutting, but it's not government cost.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to know more about where it came from, but honestly, I can't wrap my head around it.
Yeah.
All right. Being in effect, moving on, I think it's vitally important that we write our representatives and say this can't go away. As far as I know, it's passed the House and legislature and it's on to a committee vote. And it's not a great thing for us as agents, in my opinion.
With everything else that's going on.
Well, it's from it sounds like it's 2/3 of the way ratified, but it's still not impossible to derail. All right. Most important today topic, or that's the FREC disbarment is very important. Oh, and I also wanted to touch base on a couple of FIRPTA issues. We did our FIRPTA show last week. It was I won't say revolutionary, but it was an eye opener for a lot of agents. They called me during the week. They texted me during the week about FIRPTA issues. You guys, I can't stress enough, get ahead of the ball, understand FIRPTA. There is no reason in the world why buyer's agents and seller's agents are not contacting lenders and saying, hey, what's going on with my loan? And for the same reason, there's no reason in the world why agents are waiting to the last minute to find out about FIRPTA status of their sellers. It should
No,
be.
it's huge. I was going to tell everybody too. We made a blog from that one because it was so important. It's really relevant to us agents in Florida. I'm going to share it in the chat. as well. So everybody can read that. We made a
We
blog.
had FIRPTA issues come up during the week, and it was all stemming around the same issue. People not knowing whether they had a FIRPTA seller at the onset. And I'll get to you in 1 second, Alex. And then the other thing I'm seeing now is a lot of agents are putting, not a lot. I have seen in the listing, somebody sent me some screenshots, a couple agents sent me screenshots of sellers putting in their listing agreement, buyer will sign a FIRPTA affidavit. And there's no buyer that understands what that means. Everybody just thinks they're going to sign an affidavit. And then we get to the closing table. Guess who doesn't sign the affidavit once they understand what it is? And then guess who blows up the deal because the listing said the buyer will sign an affidavit. Well, that's not a contract. And the buyer is free at the last minute to say, we're not going to sign.
Yep.
So now the seller is disappointed and the agent doesn't know what to do, but nobody really understands the gravity or the significance of the issues. And that's how that stuff happens. What's up, Alex?
So, by the way, hello, everybody, and thank you again, Jim, for doing, and Ryan for doing this. So, I went ahead, last week and reached out to all my FERPTA, property landowners, property owners.
Oh,
And I
boy.
gave them the heads up and suggested that they go ahead and prepare and, get, I don't remember what the form was, but to do that now, so that should they decide to sell in within a year, 2 years, whatever it is, they're ready. They don't have to wait. It doesn't take time. It doesn't affect their sale. And they were all so grateful. And it's a step, it's a process, but it's such a simple one today rather than when you're under the gun.
Yep.
And what did you just do doing that? You stayed top of mind.
Yep.
Yeah,
You're
that's
you're
it.
you're you're top of mind. It's all about, and then you can do your follow-up. Hey, this is a follow-up. This is Alex. Did you guys get your 8288 supplied for? If
Yep.
you're gonna sell within the next year, now is a great time to start the process. Why wait to the last minute? If we get a contract that in paragraph 20 says the FIRPTA agent is FIRPTAsolutions.com and we have contact information, I will have gone to my grave knowing I did a service to this profession, having had prepared one transaction ahead of time.
Yep. Uh, I
And so-
want to make this one quick thing too is reaching out to your foreign sellers like you're doing here, Alex, is something that you're taking consideration. Is I've been working with a lot of foreign buyers, but now the sellers that I have sold over the years, I too reached out to them. And there's a really good urgency point here is the exchange rate. So the US dollar's falling, right? So now if you're a seller and a foreign seller and you're like, oh, I want to get my money on the US, it's a good time now because people are predicting that the dollar could even fall more. So obviously they're exchanging it back into their dollar, right?
Fine.
Especially the Canadians. So it
Yeah.
is actually a really good time right now, for those foreign sellers and to reach out.
No, that's a great point. I mean, it's all about relevant content, right? I got probably 5 mass emails during the course of the week with agents. How to clean your house for showing, how to prepare your house for spring, how to do this, how to do that. As a buyer or a seller, I would breeze over that stuff. As an agent, I wouldn't even give it 2 seconds thought. I mean, you really need to, and it's easy to distinguish yourself with great content. You just got to think about what motivates buyers, what motivates sellers, what might not they be aware of, and it keeps you top of mind. I like the marketing part of real estate as much as I like the law part of it because I think it's so ripe with opportunity. You just have to get creative.
Yep.
All right. The topic for today is how to write really powerful content that controls the conversation. And we've all done it. We've all been subject to it where I just got off the phone with somebody and they were in so many rabbit holes. It's about keeping the people pointed, keeping your clients pointed, keeping the opponent pointed at the issue. Being an effective and most of all persuasive communicator is key to being a productive real estate agent. Here are 2 tools to make you stand out. Getting your way when things are good is easy. Getting your way when emotions run high is challenging. Of all the skills I have, my ability to get to the point and keep things focused is my greatest skill, by far and away. People say to me, we'll walk into a contentious meeting and we'll walk out of the meeting and people say, how did you get it on point? It's not that hard. Here's 3 years of law school, 200 grand in 30 minutes. Iraq, if you never remember anything about anything I've ever taught you, there's 2 things I want you guys to remember. Seller's disclosure rule is in the contract, 3 elements. And then IRAC is how to write powerful content, how to write powerful statements that guide the conversation. Once you make your point with IRAC, great short addendums is the icing on the cake. You can text me 24/7 and we can talk about anything you guys need to talk about to get to your addendum, to get to your issue, to figure out what the rule is that controls. An example of issues that come up that agents are not aware of. How many people know the risk of loss shifts to the buyer if you give an early occupancy clause? How many people knew that the risk of loss shifts to the buyer? So the general rule is a seller bears the risk of loss all the way to the closing table. How many agents, however, do you know that say, oh, let's just get them in the property early? If there's a loss in the property before the closing, guess who has the risk of loss? The buyer, and now they're responsible.
No, I try avoid early occupancy at all costs.
Always try and avoid early occupancy at all costs. All right, part 1, IRAC, how to get your way. This is an actual scenario from a recent transaction, a typical 45-day close. Now it's the walkthrough inspection, and the buyer finds water under the kitchen cabinet below the drain. The agent who is involved with this, oh no, that's right, they're not on this pod. Young couple, no apparent damage, first home, buyers are really upset. Agent fires off a text right then and there, you need to fix this right away or we're not going to close. What's wrong with this? Is there a better way? There's absolutely a better way, and the answer is know your contract and use IRAC to form your statement to the other party. We're not going to close is a non-issue. You're going to close because if you know what your contract says, the contract says there's one thing that has to happen. And who knows what that one thing is? We'll go over in a second. So what does IRAC stand for? Issue. State the facts, what's wrong, narrow the conversation to that one issue, the water under the sink. Rule. Give the rule that controls on that issue. Analysis. Tie your facts and the rule together. The rule is usually the law. Conclusion, conclude the outcome. You always want to end your statement with what you want the other side to do. General rules to using IRAC. Name the fact at issue, name the law that supports your facts 90% of the time. The law and the rule will be the contract provision, but it can also be a state law. It can also be a lender guideline. It can be an ordinance. It can be a tax rule. So you got to know the rules roughly. We can always talk about that. I know of no other profession bound by so many rules. You guys do not have an easy job. There is so many rules that govern what you guys have to do, and you don't have to sound like a lawyer when you're stating the rule. Anyone should be able to pick up your argument and connect the dots and only reach your conclusion. Try to limit to 1 sentence for each element. So you have a 1-sentence issue statement, 1-sentence rule, 1-sentence argument, and 1-sentence conclusion. Sometimes your analysis may have more than 1 sentence. We're going to go over an example in a second. Leave emotion out. Don't play the blame game. You will only get defensive and you will both stray from the point. Everybody wants to blame somebody. Pause. Center yourself. Think about what you want to accomplish. If you blame the other side, all you're going to do is make them defensive and generate unnecessary dialogue. I watched a debate of some of the most intelligent people in our industry the other day. They both stated strong, sticking to the facts and law, but when things got heated, they both digressed into mudslinging, and the points they were trying to make were lost. I'm doing a deal on the island, and you cannot believe the amount of emotion that's been thrown into this thing. And there's only one issue, and that is what can be built on a vacant lot. And everybody's just going into a nightmare situation. So getting back to our facts, the issue, the buyer I walked, this is what you would say regarding that water under the sink at the walkthrough. The buyer and I walked through 123 Easy Sail Way today and found water under the drain in the kitchen cabinet. Boom. There's no accusation of anything. That's just what happened. Now you're stating the fact. Here's the rule you would state. Paragraph 11 of the contract says, except for ordinary wear and tear, casualty, or loss, seller shall maintain the property in the condition as of the effective date. Paragraph 11 also says if the property is not maintained in this state, to refer to paragraph 9A, which says the seller shall escrow 125% of the estimated repairs. So under the contract, the seller only has two choices, fix or escrow. There's no allowance for a closing delay. This should really be a bullet point. That's just an aside for you guys to think about. Under the contract, there's only two ways this thing can go. Think of contracts like decision trees. You move down this path, you get to an obstacle, you figure out what your decision tree is. Here your decision tree is either you're going to escrow the money seller or you're going to fix it before the closing. Those are the only two things. And most of the time, these things can't be fixed.
Can you credit?
So no, it doesn't say credit. It says an escrow. Now, I like what you just said, which is the practical answer, and we'll get to that in a minute. I always like a credit better than an escrow because an escrow just leads to an argument, potential argument. Here's the analysis. There was no leak on the effective date. This is what you'd actually write. The inspection report was done 3 days after the effective date. Page 11 discusses the plumbing. Page 12 has a picture of the kitchen sink and drain, and there is no mention of a leak or visible water. The contract says the seller shall maintain the property in the condition it was in on the effective date. There's your little mix of the facts and the rule, with the only exception to this being ordinary wear and tear, and all would agree a leak under the sink is not ordinary wear and tear. I have also provided a plumber's estimate for the repairs. So the only thing you're supposed to do as a agent in this transaction is go run around and find estimates. That's the only thing you're supposed to do. There's no discussion of not closing. We had a deal the other day. Well, let's go through the conclusion in a second, for just a second. So here's your conclusion. As the closing is tomorrow, please let me know when the seller has fixed the leak so we may re-inspect as provided in 12B, or send me an email with an escrow receipt for the mandatory deposit. The transaction shall close on time and your seller agreed to these duties when they sign the contract. Try to always bring your client, or the other side rather, back to the statement that this is what they agreed to when they signed the contract. You know, they want to say, oh, it's not right, and your client did all these terrible things. You want to say, no, this is what your client agreed to when they signed. And that takes you out of the whole transaction. It's not Australia saying, go get me an estimate. It's the contract saying, this is what your client agreed to. I had a deal the other day. We talked about it last pod. 40-year real estate agent, 40 years in the business. They're walking through the property, several $100,000 sale. There's a $300 TV missing from the wall, a flat screen TV. And the deal is blowing up over a $300 flat screen TV, several $100,000. I think it might have been $1.3 million sale. And the agent says to me, 40 years in the business, we're not closing. And I said, why aren't you closing? The TV's not on the wall, and it's not in the personal property that the seller's going to take with them. And I said, well, what's the option? And she melted down and she said, I don't know. I don't have a transactions coordinator today. 40 years in the business, she had no clue. So I quickly went to Walmart and Best Buy and sent her a few screenshots of the estimates for that $300 TV. And she used it and she drafted up an addendum, and they put the money in escrow. And we talked to them, like Australia said, we talked them into a credit versus putting the money in escrow. That's just foolishness. And so the thing closes on time. But the point is, she had no clue what was in the contract.
Jim, you know what I have the problem with is the brackets that put that are on the wall that seller's taken. I'm always telling them, leave it, it's in the contract. But yeah.
Yeah, it's fixed to the wall. Exactly. So your conclusion, you always want to write as something that it's a call to action. It's what you want the opponent to do next. You just don't give them this blanket statement that you got to fix this. Here's how you're going to fix this. You're either going to escrow the money required by the contract, or you're going to make the fix. and you've given them the rules, so it's not like they could jump into another alternative. Very, very important note, little known contract rule, section 9A, line 142 of the contract requires seller's escrow if they don't repair. It's the only place in the contract that requires a seller's escrow, but it's there. And if the pool pump is missing, or that chandelier in the entranceway was replaced with this poor, this schlocky chandelier, or we had one the other day where this beautiful slate pool table was replaced with this schlocky pool table. All that stuff has to go back, and there's no like, we're not closing. It's you're going to escrow the money, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, and we're going to get this thing settled. And like Australia said, again, the credit is far better than a post-closing escrow, always. Some tips: you would not write issue rule in front of your sentence. I had an agent using IRAC the other day, and they sent me their copy, and it had a little thing. It said issue, and then it said rule, and then it said analysis and conclusion. You don't have to do that. Here you can use some assuming language. Nobody likes to read it, but like when you write like, as you're aware, you say, as you're aware, there was water underneath the sink. I would use that kind of assuming language when you're writing one of these statements. You can use the exact words in the contract. That's always a good idea. The contract has defined terms. So when you're writing your statement, you want to use capital P for property, capital B for buyer, capital S for seller, capital C for closing. Again, don't play the blame game. You're not going to get your point. You're just going to find a rabbit hole to bury your head in. And most importantly, and one that everybody forgets, like we talked about at the very end, have a call to action. What are you doing? This or this? Don't leave it open-ended. Anybody have any questions about IRAC? You can work that into every single thing you like to want to work it into. Your spouse, your boss, the guy who's cleaning your car. It's all right there. So use it. It's powerful. I got the book award in law school. I'm not a great writer, but I was able to formulate thoughts and stick to that same pattern. You state the issue, you narrow the game, you narrow the discussion, you state the rule, you analyze a little bit, and you conclude. It works every time. All right, now we're going to talk about addendums if nobody has any questions. Of all the things you could do as a disservice to your client, and of all the things you could do to do a service to your client, writing addendums is the one thing that we have control over that's not dictated by a contract that we have to do well. I saw a addendum the other day. It said seller will pay all the taxes and assessments before closing. I don't know what they're thinking, but now they had roped their seller into so many things they weren't aware of. Sure, they had good intentions, but what problems did they create with that one sentence, and how much animosity and unnecessary calorie burn, all of that stuff. It's just, you got to know what your contract says, and you have to know, don't duplicate what's in the contract. Absolutely know what your contract says, and if you can add to it, do it. But if not, if you're going to dilute your contract or put more liability onto your client. Does everybody know what 142 of the contract is about? So the 142 of the contract is that one where it says buyer or seller is going to pay all assessments prior to closing. They're not condo assessments. They're not HOA assessments. These are very specifically municipal assessments. And so if you live in a place like Delray, where they have a special assessment for water on a few streets, that particular paragraph only applies to those communities which have special bonding assessments and things like that for special improvements. So it says that the seller is going to make all the payments prior to closing. Well, if you elect B, which some clever buyer agents think they're going to do, and you don't know what it means, now you've roped the seller, without paying attention, seller's agents, you've roped the seller into paying all those assessments prior to the closing. So in this one example, there was an assessment, and the seller was now going to pay $27,000 that the buyer could have paid over time at like $600 a year. Now the seller was going to pay it all before closing because they made that election. You got to know what the contract says. You got to know what your addendums, when you use special words, what the addendums compel your clients to do and don't do. And so I've tried to come up with an acronym to help you guys through it. I don't expect you to remember the acronym, but hopefully these things stick out a little bit. Price must be a specific value. I've seen agents write in here, not a dollar value. They'll write the highest estimate, they'll write, you know, the appropriate value, they'll write all kinds of stuff. You have to put a price in your addendums if it talks about a value. Must be a specific event. Everyone must be able to look at the event and recognize it. The inspection, a certain date, a certain something. Don't be vague. A trigger date is almost always the best idea. If you're going to have something that has to occur by a certain date, don't make it occur by the closing. Don't make the panel inspection to occur by the closing. Make the panel reinspection, the electrical panel reinspection, make that by a certain date. 10 days prior to closing, some date that everybody can identify. And I don't really like calling out timeframes. I always like dates, because what if the closing date moves? Now your reinspection date moved. I like specific dates more than I like calling out timeframes. Here is the most single important thing you can do in your addendum. Don't say too much. You have to figure out the fewest words to make your point. Why? Because if there is an attorney on the other side and they're looking at this addendum, they will use any extra words you use against you. If you say the credit is for the panel repair and you use a piece of the credit for something else, now you've created unnecessary dialogue. You don't even have to say that the credit is for the panel repair. All you have to say is that seller's going to give the buyer $500 credit at closing. That's it. As soon as you start tying it to certain things, as soon as you start saying too much, I saw one the other day, a guy's been doing real estate. I've been working with him for the last 10 or 15 years. He wrote a paragraph about all the buyer failures and why, or the seller failures, and why the buyer was getting a credit. That thing was so pregnant with opportunity for somebody to tie that transaction up forever to discuss the issues. And all I really needed to say was that the buyer was going to get a credit for $500 at the closing. Use defined terms, capitalized words in the contract, closing date, effective date, personal property, closing, loan approval period, closing agent and escrow agent. Everybody knows there's a difference between a closing agent and an escrow agent. The escrow agent is defined at the very beginning of the contract. The closing agent, although it's used throughout the contract, it's the only term in the contract that's defined at the end of the agreement. It's the only term in the contract that's defined after they use it in the contract. But there is a difference between a closing agent and an escrow agent. Collateral dates don't change. If you change the inspection period and you want to extend the loan approval period, say it. Otherwise, it doesn't change. You guys all know this, but I'm telling you, there are agents that you're going to be working with on the other side that should be reported to FREC who don't know about this, who don't know that the collateral dates don't change. If you move the closing date out, nothing else changes unless you've said in your agreement that the inspection period ends 2 days before the closing date. That's the only way those dates move out. Know your contract. That's the most important thing. It sounds crazy. I coached a guy, wow, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 15 years ago, I coached him. I told him to read his contract 3 times and read it once a month. And he was just last year one of the top commissioned agents in Palm Beach County, selling some condos at the Bristol and things like that. But it's because he knows his contract and he does a great job that he instills that value. And when somebody starts talking about something, whether it's his client or the other side, he can refute whatever they're saying or support whatever they're saying with a contract provision. For example, when they're talking about seller's disclosures, he knows that stuff off the top of his head, and it just instills confidence in his client that he's the guy. Or if the client's starting to talk about something to do that might be repugnant to the contract, he knows what the contract provision is, and he'll say to his client, well, yeah, well, that's not what we agreed to in the client. That's not what we agreed to in the contract. So instead of there having to even be a back and forth, he knows his contract so well. When the client starts talking about something, he uses the contract as a tool against his client, but it keeps everybody in the lane that you want them to be in. Oh, this is the one we talked about earlier. I found this in an actual addendum. Seller will pay all closed, open, and expired permits, special assessments, and the property shall be free and clear of all taxes and assessments at closing. What a nightmare that was.
Free of all taxes.
Yeah, we talked about assessments. How do all of you convey property free of all taxes? It's already in the contract, line 472. Yeah, how can you convey a property free of all taxes? That was another discussion that came up. So it was a 2024 closing, and they wanted the seller to pay the entire year of 2024 taxes. Otherwise, the buyer was going to receive property with some tax burden for the remainder of 2024. It can't be done. Tips, don't tell a long story, bare minimum, we talked about that. Define terms, we talked about that. Four corners rule, this is so important. You want to remind everybody in the deal that whoever picks up this contract has to be able to understand the transaction regardless of what they know about your transaction. So in other words, agents will tell me all the time, well, they already knew the seller lived in the woods and they couldn't get DocuSign, or they didn't have internet access or whatever, and there was going to be delays. It all has to be in the contract. Any judge, people say, well, we're going to litigate. Any judge has to be able to pick up the contract and determine everything. So every initial that post dates the signing of the contract has to have a date on it. Every change to the contract has to have a date on it. Everything you can think of that is intuitive to you because you know the deal has to be memorialized on the paper. It's called the Four Corners Rule. Anybody who picks up that document just by looking at the document without hearing any backstory should understand everything to do with that transaction. Or there should be an addendum. Use addendums for everything. They'll cover your exposure. Parties can digitally sign and send to your title company right away. A great example of an easy mistake: addendums fix our effective dates. If you read the contract, they're easy and have misunderstandings. In the contract, it says the effective date is the date it was signed and what?
Delivered.
And everybody,
Delivered.
yeah, everybody would agree that it's the date it's signed. But if you have a contract that's signed on Tuesday, we had a seller that lived up in Stewart, and their agent had to go up and they had to grab it on Tuesday evening and then bring it back and circulate it on Wednesday. The effective date is technically Wednesday, even though her date signature was Tuesday. And so you circulate an addendum that just says the effective date is Tuesday. And it's an easy thing to do. Post-closing addendums. First most important rule, don't do it. Post-closing escrows are a last resort. Australia brought this up earlier. If you can figure out any way, all old school agents want to do a post-closing escrow. If you can figure out any way to get around doing it, don't do it. But for that roof leak that's still leaking, for example, follow pet duct closely. Call me before you draft. There has to be a drop dead date and a clear statement as to when the seller has to do and what they have to do it by. The clear instructions as to when the title agent is supposed to deliver the money to the buyer. We saw one the other day. It was a post-closing escrow, and it said the escrow agent, the closing agent will escrow $5,000 for the roof leak. You got to be kidding me. It has to have a date that the roof is going to be fixed by. It has to have a statement as to the notice that's going to be delivered by the parties. And then if that notice doesn't happen, where the money's going to go. It can't just sit in the escrow at closing agent's office forever. And so it actually takes a lot of thought. The much better solution is the seller's going to credit $5,000 to the buyer for the roof leak. Most post-closing issues can be solved with an as-is property maintenance, what I call the mandatory seller escrow provision on the contract. That's it. That's what we talked about earlier. No party in default. Very important. If you are in a transaction and it's been contentious and going back and forth, and even if you're not in a contentious transaction, I always like to write in my addendums, to date, no party is in default. That way it takes off all the discussion. You know, we want to rehab deals. We got a deal in our office right now. It's on the 3rd or 4th extension. You don't want, if the thing fails, somebody to come back and say earlier, well, you were in default a long time ago. If you have that one clause in your last addendum, that cuts off that whole conversation. Well, you were in default at addendum 1. Well, you were in default on addendum 2. On your 4th or 5th addendum, to have no party in prior default, there's no discussion about it. Tidbits, things to think about. Who knows how the mandatory seller escrow works? We talked about that. Did you know there was a difference between an escrow? We talked about that. What are the 2 ways an escrow agent or a closing agent can pay money out of the escrow? There's only 2 ways to break escrow. One is the parties agree. That is the only way to break escrow that's most frequently used, whether it's a settlement statement or a cancellation of contract. The only other way to break escrow is a judge's order. If you have not written a proper addendum, the judge will never get to that conclusion. So there's only 2 ways to break escrow. It's not because the other side is stupid or the other side didn't perform. It's the parties agree or a judge orders. Those are the only times escrow can be broken. And the agreement can be a closing or the agreement can be a cancellation. But if you don't write a powerful addendum and you're going to rely on a judge to break escrow, you're going to find the judge giving the money back to the buyer and you know, people not happy. We've talked about this in the past, how to control title, write us in as the closing agent in the FAR bar on line 155. And that's it. That's all I got for today.
Wow, Jim. I mean, coming from a real estate attorney, these tips, pet duck and IRAC, right? I also shared the outline too in the chat so everybody can have it there as well. But I mean, it's something that, as an agent, writing clear and concise addendums is a massive skill. And not only does it make, it gets to the point, right, and gets you the transaction easier, you look good in front of your clients.
Yeah.
And, they're more apt to refer you to their friends or use you again on the next transaction, right?
And the goal is we spend less time on every deal and do a better job. And you spend less time on your deal if you formulate your thoughts well. If you can construct proper addendums, you spend less time on your deals. So if you guys have questions anytime during the transaction, just text me 24/7 and we'll go over the addendum. The one I was handling just now while I was in the car heading into the podcast. The one I was just doing now it was an easy one. The seller was getting all worked up because there was a condominium and the buyer was at the last minute going to have somebody stay in the property and they weren't going to be approved. As a seller, you have a right to know who's applying for application in your buyer side, and you write your IRAC statement to the condominium association the condominium association who's applying for the application, and then you can have that conversation with the buy side, and you can have the conversation about the rule that says nobody can live there as a tenant for the first year, and do that in a concise manner that narrows the issues. Like he had this whole dialogue in his head of all these issues that weren't relevant. There's only one issue. You can't live there in the first year as a tenant. So now they have to add this person that's going to live there as a buyer. And so you want to see the application and see who's applied as a buyer. Otherwise, they can't live there. Period. End of story. All right, you guys. Once a month meetup. Title Leap saves you time. Title Advance saves you time. And we have a new attorney at our office. He's doing our transactional work. Matthew, if you guys have any buyers that need representation, sellers that need representation, we're happy to do that part of the transaction for them. We're seeing more and more now with sellers not want to paying buy-side agents. Sellers agents are actually referring buyers to us, so they're not doing both sides of the deal since they're not getting paid for it. We're seeing a lot of out-of-town sellers looking for attorneys. Matthew's doing a great job on these. He's working at a lower rate than me, so it saves you guys money. And he comes to me with all the hard stuff anyway. So if you know anybody that's looking for an attorney to represent them in a transaction or an eviction or an ejectment We have one where somebody's living in the property and they're not allowed to be there. They don't have a lease. They were a friend that's being held over, that stayed over. They were a friend at one time. That's not an eviction. If they went to a lawyer and they filed an eviction, they'd have lots of defenses to staying in the property for a long period of time. That's an ejectment. So we filed the ejectment. They'll be out shortly, and then the property can be sold. We love doing stuff like that, helping you guys get to the closing table. That's
Love
it. Oh, the other thing is TO Capital. So we're doing a lot of hard money loans for people. If you guys know buyers that need fix and flip capital, they need Airbnb or bridge loan capital, things like that, I'm happy to pay you guys 1 to 2 points. So we did a $300,000 loan. The agent's getting $6,000 at the closing for bringing the loan to us, and we'll also loan on other transactions where we're not the closing agent. So keep that in the back of your mind. If you know a buyer who has lending grenade at the last minute, we can have hard money capital step in and we can have that loan close, or you just know fix and flippers or investors that need capital. Those are great transactions for us. What's up, Alex?
Question with regards to that. I deal with a lot of Canadians, and do you also does that apply for foreign nationals?
Absolutely. We're doing a Canadian loan for a mortgage broker that deals with nobody but Canadians, and absolutely. If you guys ever knew the rental rules in Canada, you would think Florida was a gift from heaven. When you rent in Canada, your tenant gets an automatic renewal every year until they tell you they don't want to live there anymore, and you're not allowed to raise their rent.
Yep.
Unbelievable.
We had that agent from Lend City on one of our podcasts, Jim, that we had. Remember that he can do Canadian loans, by the way, in Florida. Yep, which is great. Wendy had a quick question. Can RealTrade market specifically to Canadian agents for listings? I'll tell you this, we don't have a lot Canadian agents on RealTrade. We have Canadian members, right? So we have Canadian members, buyers and sellers that have signed up for RealTrade. You can always post on the RealTrade social offering your services to Canadians. I think this Canadian thing's real. Like I said, I've had now two past clients, Canadians now, that want to sell real estate. So
all you got to do is educate Canadian people that actually are doing rentals on the benefits of US rentals.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable how
on
hard
the buy side, it's huge. I'm actually doing another webinar with a Canadian real estate agent next this on Saturday that I'm going to be going over some stuff on. Now's a good time to buy in Florida. I don't know how well it's going to go over, but we'll see how well it goes over. I did share too, Jim. Great job on this, by the way. This is an awesome. I mean, to condense, how much money did you spend on your law degree, Jim? You know what I mean? To condense that down to about 35 minutes for us agents.
Of all the things I've taken away, there's only two. The most important laws are federal, state ordinances, and then lending rules and things like that. So there's a pecking order of laws and case laws at the bottom, and IRAC. Those are the two things. Those are the only two things I use from law school every day.
Yep. Great job, Jim. I also shared Title Advance in the chat. Guys, take advantage of that. It's actually under your dashboard on RealTrade where you can order title advances. It saves you so much time. Even now on buying deals, I got that really crazy deal, Jim, that you talked to my seller that on a three-way call the other day that we're going to need some more of your help. But there's actually going to be probably major title issues. There's 3 different entities that own 10 condos that's in one building that we want to convert to a single multifamily. It's going to be a very tough transaction.
So that's a reverse SIRS milestone inspection and SIRS transaction. These people have what would otherwise be a condominium subject to milestone and SIRS, and then they're going to purchase and simultaneously abandon the condominium and turn it into an apartment, which is not subject to SIRS and milestones.
Yeah.
Wrap your head around that.
It's not going to be an easy deal, Jim. That's not going to be an easy deal. That's where you're going to help us through that one. So
yeah, value created as a result of milestone inspections and SIRS.
Yep.
So they're going to take the building.
And the seller's in major distress. I mean, he hasn't paid his taxes in like 2 years. I mean, this guy's got $500,000 in liens from the city of Lake Worth Beach, and he hasn't done his milestone inspection report.
Yep,
Gonna be easy. All right, guys. This has been an awesome one. Thank you so much, Jim.
you bet. Have a great day, guys.
All right, good luck out
Thank
there.
you very much.